All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. We do educational videos here, and we focus on great theories of everything, ancient and modern, cosmologies, grand unified theories, magnum opuses, tour de forces, and cosmologies, if I didn't say that, and mostly obscure. Things you probably haven't heard about, but if you did, they might revolutionize your life. Your ability to paradigm shift, your ability to wake up to your 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, and your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And today is our 6th video that we've done on this work called It's After the End of the World, Don't You Know That Yet? And it's a history of a lot of great musicians who lived in this country in the 20th century, and you know, what to do with their what they were thinking about when they came up with this music, and how they want you to use it to help out your own creativity and spirituality. And we are getting toward the end of the first chapter called Calling Planet Earth, which is mostly about the early life of Sun Ra, who became was a band leader, but he also had a lot of other experiences. His main thrust was finding the true meaning of the Bible. He had an alien abduction experience that got him to focus his music on the spiritual rather than the commercial. And he had a lot of other different things going on with his life that mostly detailed so far. But now he has moved to Chicago and from Birmingham, and he's kind of getting a little bit of a sponsorship here with this guy Alton Abraham, who was actually very young, like a teenager, and but he fronted Sonny some money to kind of get his band going. Sonny could make money, you know, as a professional musician, but and did at times, but his goal was to get his own band going where he could play the music that he wanted to. Okay, so we're going to start up right here. Even before getting involved with Abraham's group, Sun Ra tended to work with young musicians, perhaps because the older ones were wary of him. Now, just keep in mind, Sun Ra at this point, he's like, you know, in his late 30s or so. He was theoretically born in 1914. So this is in the early 50s. The older musicians were wary of him. In many accounts from other musicians, Sonny was polite but reserved, shy but good-natured over their ribbing about him not smoking or drinking. Still, his objections and inversions eventually set him apart from the consensus in orchestral jazz. Because of his eccentricities, the Black Musicians Union actively discouraged other musicians from working with him. Through his early years in Chicago, Sonny established a reputation as the most advanced musician in Chicago, but in his own space. In this period, Sonny continued his quest to find the true meaning of the Bible. He was buying books every place, every week. Schwed claims that his apartment had a wall filled from floor to ceiling with obscure esoteric books. The Bronzeville years gave Sonny the perfect time and place to progress on deciphering the Bible. He probably did not have the full picture drawn until a later period, but certainly by the time he started to form his own band in 1951, some of the fundamental aspects of the equation had become clear to him. Sonny's exegesis took on both secular and religious dimensions, but he commonly started with the adage of judging the tree by the fruit, which was, to him, rotten. I think humanity's hit bottom, he said. He believed that the reasons humans were in this miserable state was their refusal to recognize that the misery existed. He often pointed to the rationalizations they used to forestall scrutiny. Quote, you know, for a long time they've been getting by with sex and dope and religion and equality. You got to face reality that whatever man feels that's right is not doing him any good. It's time for something else, he continued. But it's like somebody wrote a scenario for humanity and they're living that scenario. They're acting in a play. They have to have something added to that play or an extension of it. Like you're on a highway and you go on a ramp and get off it. They need a ramp. They need to get off this pathway they're on and get on another one. And moreover, he said, when they start facing basic facts, which are all very terrible, then maybe the scientists on this planet will start doing something creative. First, they got to be honest with themselves. They start there. Most men aren't honest with themselves. Somebody has taught them to want things. It's that they've been brainwashed by their families, the church, the school, their friends, mothers, fathers. They've been brainwashed, and really they want that. And then they should think about what they need. He lamented that his generation, quote, didn't prepare a way for young people to survive. It gave them the wrong behaviors to imitate. They insist on holding on to some traditional things that are bad for them and don't magnify and really glorify the things that are really good. They have to hold on to those who really did something. Use them as a foundation. If they left any shred of beauty, that's what we have to use. We can't stand on the treadmill anymore, he said. Instead, however, quote, you, the younger generation, lost, because you ain't got nothing to hold on to. You can't look to them, the older generation. But I saw all of that years ago, and I didn't participate in what your parents did and what your leaders did. I did not participate because I knew it was coming to this. I saw that, and I didn't go that way. The young people, to some extent, were the victims of a mediated worldview. Quote, I don't blame the children because they can see something is missing in their elders, who are, quote, following shadows and make-believe stuff, he claimed. Radio, for example, was one such mediated fantasy world. Radio was at first targeted at white audiences, while records were a much more important influence on blacks. It was not until 1943 when Chicago DJ Al Benson consciously sought out a black mass market for consumption that the black community sunk headlong into the democracy of goods. Benson played the records of the newest popular music for the black community. He was not the first black DJ, but his popularity emanated from the fact that he was the only DJ who sounded black. He also played race music while other DJs played only major record labels, safe blacks like Ella Fitzgerald and Nat King Cole. In the post-war period, Benson developed a virtual monopoly in Bronzeville over radio endorsing, both records and products. If Benson played and endorsed a record on the air, it would be sold out of Southside record stores within hours. Likewise, if an institution wanted to sell a product to the black community, they had to go through Benson. On the air, he hawked Swiss Colony wine, cremettes, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Canadian Ace beer, among other consumables. As an example of his power, Benson defied white companies when he withdrew from the station WGES as it came under new management. When he left, he took most of the black listeners with him to the news station, and finally corporate advertisers were forced to follow him. Benson helped put a post-war generation of blacks in Chicago into an institutional consumer's mindset. Okay, this is the chapter conclusion. Sonny, opposing Benson and others, fought against the apocalyptic landscape that he saw forming in the wasteland of bad habits, addiction, misinformed leaders, and illusory freedom. He wanted musicians to seek a higher self in their occupation, to see it as a healing mission. Quote, as a child, you had a lot of dreams about something pure, something you wanted to be, but you yourself got compromised by older people. You failed, just like America. Now you got a whole planet that is doing things that's ridiculous. End quote. Denial was holding them in place, but the problem of inversion was complicated and required equations. He believes some folks is controlling people, this is a quote, some folks is controlling people with words. People can be snared by words. And as a result, quote, they have a labyrinth in their heads. In order to get out, quote, you have to have the proper equations. Sonny's system of equations will be detailed in the next chapter, along with his creative process of orchestration. And that's orchestra with an A, A-R-K. And that's the end of the chapter. We've got enough time to get started with the second chapter, but it does take a couple seconds here to locate it and get it uploaded. Yeah, here we go. And chapter 2 is called orchestration. And the first section, or the introduction, is called interplanetary discipline. Sonny extended his conscientious objection through a process of interplanetary discipline. He believed that the human conception of discipline was insufficient, that human consciences and wills remained too weak for true discipline. He also believed that black people, especially musicians, needed to invoke a higher self-standard that took into account not just their own kind, but all beings on the planet. An interviewer asked him, quote, the discipline is about doing something every day, every hour, right? Sonny replied, well, no, that's earth discipline, maybe an armed force. Infinity discipline is different from the earth discipline because infinity itself means constant variety, endless immeasurableness. But I mean, you have to have the discipline to channel the energies. Every person is in captivity to their body. Once you have interplanetary discipline, he says you have, quote, graduated beyond, risen above love and passion. For Sonny, interplanetary discipline was the warriors or the heroes rise above the human emotions and sensual impulses, including joy and love. Sonny discouraged his musicians from sexual and romantic relationships, believing them to be a distraction. He gave similar lectures about alcohol and other addictive drugs. He believed that it was necessary to abstain. For Sonny, interplanetary discipline enabled the musician to, quote, pay in advance, end quote, karmically speaking, to enforce sacrifice and justice upon yourself so that future violations of the universal karmic law are already atoned for. Quote, if you pay for what you want, you got it made. Pay in advance. That's the strategy. Likewise, his music was unplayable unless you, quote, pay dues. interplanetary discipline was not about earth emotions, but about precision, about heightening sensitivity by tuning into the forces of natural law. Okay, this section is called Name Selection. Sonny's approach to his musical mission naturally included naming, since what he was doing was original and unprecedented. No language had been yet created for it. In many cases, he had to invent the words to describe it. On October 20th, 1952, Herman Sonny Blunt became Le Sonny Ra. That's capital L-E, capital S-O-N-Y, apostrophe R, and capital R-A. Sonny Blunt became Le Sonny Ra with the state of Illinois, Sun Ra for short. Changing his name was the official act of renunciation that symbolically affirmed his conscientious objection. It was the formality needed for him to finally say, "I gave up my life." Many other African-American leaders, Sojourner Truth, Father Divine, Noble Drew Ali, and Daddy Grace, for example, have changed their names in order to clarify their mission. Sun Ra felt changing his name was a strategic event that improved his position and legitimated his purpose, rather than marginalizing him further, because you have to register yourself with the authorities. If Jesus had done that, he wouldn't have had to go up there on that cross. With Sun Ra's inverted logic and oratory, he eventually convinced many other black musicians to change their names too. After the fact, Sun Ra even claimed that the Nation of Islam members had adopted the X in their names because of one of his speeches in Washington Park about naming. Personally, connecting spirit to music, he wanted a name that had more rhythm and more metaphysical value. Hence, he named himself for the Egyptian god of the life force. Sun Ra was concerned about karmic implications in his name and sought to exonerate himself of the karma of Herman Blunt. Analogously, he believed that the name of the earth itself should be changed, so, quote, it won't be there when God gets ready to destroy it. Other African-American performers have also adopted stage names, but usually only as an alter identity. Sun Ra, however, completely absorbed any residue of Herman Blunt, a name he disliked from the start, and he had mostly gone by Sonny. Sun Ra's manner belied the content of his rhetoric. Sun Ra had the tendency to say very shocking things in a calm, soft-spoken voice, and he was rarely agitated even by the most hostile questioning. The outer space persona of Sun Ra gave him more, not less, legitimacy when discussing his inversions of history and religion. He also strategically decided to use the name orchestra for his band. It had Ra, inverted, at the beginning and at the end. Besides, quote, it's how black people pronounce orchestra. He also likened the orchestra to Noah's Ark. Over the years, depending upon his feeling, the band switched names so often that putting them in a list helps define his mission. The Myth Science Orchestra, the Solar Myth Orchestra, the Intergalactic Orchestra, the Interplanetary Research Orchestra, the Power of Astro Infinity Orchestra, the Solar Hieroglyphics Orchestra, the Nature Immortality Orchestra, the Solar Science Orchestra, the Solar Nature Orchestra, the Humanitarian Orchestra, the Outer Space Orchestra, the Cosmic Stellar Orchestra, the 21st Century Echoes Orchestra, the Year 2000 Myth Science Orchestra, and the Alter Destiny 21st Century Omniverse Orchestra are just a few. After 20 years of research, and transformation, Sonny's inverted practice of orchestration began to come into manifestation beginning in the 1950s. Okay, this section is called The Structure of Orchestration. Certainly, it would be folly for any commentator to claim any type of complete understanding of Sun Ra's life mission with so many stones still left unturned. But his actions had a consistency across time that have revealed a few main thrusts of orchestration. Orchestration had a simple but inverted logic to it. Like his biblical exegesis, however, Sun Ra's ideas have been exaggerated to seem ridiculous and fantastic when they are really quite natural, stemming organically from his experience. The words were sometimes out in space, but the underlying meaning was always close at hand. Through the crossing of individual inspiration, often mistaken for creativity itself, and interplanetary discipline, Sun Ra derived his creative equations for orchestration. Sun Ra was inspired with seemingly endless musical ideas, but he believed in taking these ideas, dividing them into their component parts, and practicing them ad nauseum in rehearsal, and then finally executing them in real-time performance. His orchestration owed a debt to the Black orchestral tradition. He similarly used strict discipline, but as in training for something playful, a game or a play. In orchestration, he sought to avoid the abusive tendencies of despotic band leaders and the license and egotism of show bands. Sun Ra often compared his authority with the military. Quote, "We weren't trained in killing the enemy, but in the spirit of humanity." Sun Ra's advanced concepts of musical orchestration can serve as an example to help us to find that elusive balance between authority and freedom. In Sun Ra's eyes, that balance was way out of tune in the post-war bebop movement among jazz musicians. Bebop, or bop, was a dissenting influence that came from New York after it was developed there in the years before and during World War II. As bebop leader Dizzy Gillespie noted, the seminal idea in bebop was for the musicians to iterate the commercial requirements of swing, but to do so with editorial criticism, which was often expressed in dissonance, what Gillespie called parodies on the harmonic structures. While a tenuous, harmonious consensus held on in Bronzeville, bebop beliefs were seen as avant-garde, ahead of their time. By the 1950s, however, that subversive subculture threatened to undermine the institutions involved in Black orchestral representation. Much of bebop's message was carried to Chicago by saxophonist Charlie Parker. His story in Chicago reveals many of the subtle issues that were at stake in the Black professional music world. The saga of Charlie Parker demonstrates how he shook up Chicago through outright rejection of Black institutional discipline. Parker's noncompliance was a threat in the highly skilled world of big bands. He could play the arrangements, but he just didn't want to. In 1943, Parker and Gillespie both served an apprenticeship in Earl Hines' orchestra, which, as we have seen, was probably the most lenient swing orchestra in Chicago, suitably called the incubator of bop. By the time Parker returned to Chicago in 1945, he had become a scourge of the Chicago music scene establishment, but a towering inspiration to a new generation of musicians who did not believe in the harmonious consensus that show business represented. Parker's first disciples in Chicago were Tom Archia and Goon Gardner. Dozens of others soon followed. soon followed their lead. Charlie Parker's influence created an artistic music of dissent in Chicago, but also helped to divide the musicians' community. Chicago band leaders had to monitor Parker's behavior constantly to make sure it complied with the institutional representation. On more than one occasion, Parker used the phone booth of the music hall as a toilet. Sometimes during the show, he would stand up unannounced and play a solo. At other times, he would surreptitiously switch his sheet music with the saxophonist sitting in the chair next to him. Parker was usually accompanied by an entourage of followers who were held in disrepute by the show band crowd. Frequently, he did not even show up for gigs. When he did, he might be dressed in rags, so the club would have to arrange for a suit for him to put on. He once got Colored Musicians Union President Harry Gray so upset with him that Gray pulled a gun and threatened to kill him. At least one band leader made the same threat. Parker's dissent developed in his hometown of Kansas City on numerous barnstorming tours with various swing bands, and in the individualist New York scene, was at first conspicuously out of place in Chicago, but within a decade had given rise to a veritable epidemic of institutional dissonance. In addition to his on-stage antics, Parker's image did great violence to the South Side Chicago community because of his use of heroin. Junk was a new drug on the street, and it quickly became one of the jazz musicians' occupational hazards. Pushers and even record companies would offer it to young musicians until they were hooked, which, given its addictive properties, didn't take long, leaving the musician even more dependent on the jazz establishment. Several musicians have indicated that Parker was the first musician I knew who was on it. During the next decade, a whole generation of young black musicians exposed themselves to the permissive bebop lifestyle, not realizing that the allure of freedom came with a hidden price, hidden in time. Within 15 years, according to saxophonist John Gilmore, hundreds of Chicago's black musicians had become victims of heroin. Parker, due to addiction, made it only to age 34 before his abused body gave out in 1955. Many of his loyal disciples didn't even make it halfway that far. Sun Ra believed that the heroin epidemic was characteristic of a greater systematic abuse of black musicians. While bebop was revolutionary in rejecting the repetitions of swing, it did not reject the whole worldview of show business representation, especially including the hazards of overconsumption and celebrity individualism. The bebop influence was an assertion of dissent, but it lacked self-discipline. Bebop musicians remained unconscious of the effects that their own consumption and their own egotism would have upon younger members of the movement. The bebop musicians replaced the show business star and professional functions with the hip lifestyle of the existential iconoclastic artist. Bebop was overwhelmingly an individualist, oppositional ethic that fought commercial institutions through dissent, but was unable to offer a sustainable alternative. Okay, I think we're going to stop right there at the end of that section. The next section, section 4, here in chapter 2, is called Inverting Freedom. And we will check that out tomorrow when we return. So thanks for tuning in today.